The holographic transmission flickered to life in the center of the United Earth Council chamber, casting a pale blue glow across the faces of every admiral, diplomat, and head of state gathered in that massive room. The chamber itself was a monument to human achievement, built deep beneath the Swiss Alps, with walls of polished marble and ceilings that stretched so high they disappeared into shadow. 300 of humanity's most powerful leaders sat in tiered rows, all of them at the alien figure that had materialized before them. High Commander of the Dominion stood 7 feet tall in the projection. His body was covered in black armor-like skin that gleamed like polished obsidian. His head was elongated, with 6 compound eyes that reflected light like shattered mirrors, and his mouth was a nightmare of interlocking mandibles that clicked together as he spoke. Behind him, visible through what appeared to be a viewport, stretched an armada of warships so vast that they blocked out the stars themselves. "Humans of Earth," announced, his voice translated into perfect English by the communication systems, "the truce your ancestors for 3,000 years ago has reached its end. As of this moment, the Dominion hereby declares total and absolute war upon your species. You have 72 of your Earth hours to surrender unconditionally. If you refuse, you will face complete annihilation. Every human colony will be burned. Every human city will be reduced to ash. Every human life will be extinguished. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification." The transmission ended abruptly, and the blue light faded away, leaving the chamber in heavy silence. 300 of humanity's most important people sat frozen in their seats. The weight of the declaration hung in the air like smoke. 3,000 years of peace, shattered in an instant. The most feared military force in the known galaxy had just promised to wipe humanity from existence. The silence lasted for exactly 3 seconds. Then Admiral Grace Murphy, Supreme Commander of the United Earth Force, leaned back in her leather chair and smiled. She was 62 years old, with silver hair cut short and practical and eyes of storm clouds. Her uniform was decorated with more medals than most officers earned in 10 lifetimes. She had commanded fleets, won battles that military academies still studied, and once held a crumbling defensive line against space pirates for 11 days without sleep or reinforcement. And right now, she was smiling the way a grandmother smiles when she hears her are coming to visit. "Well," she said calmly, her voice carrying through the silent chamber, "took them long enough." Across the table, Secretary of Webb let out a short laugh and loosened his tie. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with kind eyes and a sharp mind, and he looked more amused than alarmed. "I was starting to think they forgot about us." General Cole, commander of Earth's ground forces, pulled out a data tablet and began scrolling through deployment schedules with the casual energy of someone reviewing a shopping list. "Should I activate the reserves, Admiral?" "Might as well," Admiral Murphy replied. "No sense in being lazy about it." The younger diplomats and officials in the chamber looked at each other in confusion. Some of them had gone pale at the declaration. Some of them were still trembling. And here were the senior military commanders of humanity, chatting about the impending apocalypse as if they were discussing what to have for lunch. Ambassador Liam Porter, humanity's primary liaison to the galactic community, shook his head with obvious amusement. He was a tall man with graying temples and the kind of face that naturally inspired trust. "Should someone inform thee about the actual situation, or do we let it be a surprise?" "Surprise," Admiral Murphy said without hesitation. "Definitely a surprise." Chancellor, the elected leader of United Earth, finally spoke up. She was younger than most in the room, barely 50, with dark skin and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. For those of us who were not briefed on the full scope of our defensive capabilities, perhaps an explanation would be helpful. Admiral Murphy rose from her seat. She walked to the center of the chamber, where the holographic projector still quietly, and pressed a series of commands into her wrist device. A new image appeared, and this time it was not a threatening alien commander. It was a map of human space, but not the small, cramped territory that the galaxy believed humanity occupied. This map showed something far larger: hundreds of star systems, thousands of installations, shipyards hidden in asteroid belts, research stations concealed within nebulae, fleet bases buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons, all of it connected by a network of light routes that the rest of the galaxy had no idea existed. 3,000 years ago, Admiral Murphy began, humanity was a fledgling civilization. We had barely figured out how to travel between stars when they arrived. They came with 10,000 warships. They burned 3 of our colonies to cinders in a single day. Our entire military was destroyed in less than a week. She paused, letting the weight of history settle over the room. Our ancestors had no choice. They surrendered, they for peace. They accepted a truce that the rest of the galaxy saw as humiliating. We were confined to a small corner of space, forbidden from expanding, forbidden from building military vessels beyond a token force. The galaxy laughed at us. They called us the species that surrendered, the cowards, the weaklings. Admiral Murphy smiled again, but this time there was something sharp in it, something dangerous. What the galaxy did not know was that our ancestors understood something very important. The truce had an expiration date, 3,000 years, and then they would return to finish what they started. They never intended to let us survive. The truce was just a delay, a way to deal with us later when it was convenient. She gestured at the vast map floating above them. So humanity made a decision. We would accept their terms. We would appear weak and broken. We would hide in our little corner of space and let the galaxy forget about us. And in secret, in absolute secrecy, we would spend every single one of those 3,000 years. The map zoomed in on one installation after another. Shipyards producing vessels unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Weapons laboratories developing technologies that physics. Training academies producing soldiers who were stronger and smarter than any baseline human had ever been. Every human child for the past 3,000 years has grown up knowing that one day they would return, Admiral Murphy said quietly. Every scientist has worked toward this moment. Every soldier has trained for this war. Every engineer has built for this fight. Our entire civilization, our entire culture has been shaped by a single truth. She looked around the chamber at the faces of humanity's leaders. We knew they were coming, and now they are here. Admiral Murphy clasped her hands behind her back. Send the diplomatic response, keep it simple. The message that humanity transmitted back to the Dominion was exactly 4 words long. We accept your declaration. Across the galaxy, other species monitored the exchange with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. They had conquered dozens of civilizations. The humans had been hiding in their little corner of space for 3 millennia. Everyone knew how this would end. The humans would fight bravely, perhaps. They might win a battle or two through luck or desperation. But in the end, they would be crushed like every other species that had dared to stand against the Dominion. The galaxy was about to learn how wrong it was. High Commander stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, watching through the massive viewport as his armada assembled in the darkness of space. The sight before him was the greatest display of military power the Dominion had ever gathered in its long and bloody history. 12,000 warships hung in formation, each one bristling with plasma cannons and antimatter torpedoes and kinetic accelerators capable of punching through planetary crusts. Carrier vessels the size of small moons carried millions of ground troops. Support ships hauled enough supplies to sustain a campaign lasting decades, all of it gathered for one purpose: the complete and total destruction of humanity. His mandibles clicked together in satisfaction as he surveyed his forces. His compound eyes reflected the running lights of 1,000 nearby vessels, each reflection a reminder of his species' absolute dominance. They had been conquerors for 20,000 years. They had crushed civilizations that had believed themselves invincible. They had burned worlds that had stood for millions of years. No species had ever truly challenged them. And certainly not the humans. Sub-Commander approached from the tactical station, her movements careful and deferential. She was young for her rank, her carapace still carrying the lighter coloration of an officer who had not yet seen extensive combat. In her clawed hands, she carried a data tablet displaying the latest intelligence reports. High Commander, she said, keeping her compound eyes lowered in respect, our scout vessels have returned from human space. Their reports have been compiled and analyzed. And what do they tell us? Asked, not bothering to turn away from the viewport. The human fleet appears modest, High Commander. Our scouts identified approximately 300 vessels defending their core systems. Their largest ships are perhaps half the size of our cruisers. Their weapons signatures suggest plasma-based armaments of moderate yield. Their defensive stations are minimal. His mandibles clicked again, this time with amusement. As expected, 3,000 years of isolation has made them soft. They probably spent their time breeding and consuming entertainment media, as primitives often do. There is one anomaly, continued, and noted a slight hesitation in her voice. The energy readings from their vessels are unusual. Our sensors had difficulty categorizing certain power signatures. Additionally, several of our scout vessels reported momentary sensor interference when approaching certain regions of human space. Finally turned to face his subordinate. Explain. We are uncertain, High Commander. The interference patterns do not match any known phenomena. Some of our analysts believe it may indicate previously undetected installations or facilities. Others suggest it is merely the result of outdated human equipment causing electromagnetic scatter. And what do you believe, Sub-Commander? Paused for a moment before. I believe that 3,000 years is a long time, High Commander, long enough for even a primitive species to make unexpected advances. studied her for a long moment, his 6 eyes unblinking. Then he made a sound that might have been a laugh, a harsh clicking of his throat plates. "You are young, you have not yet learned that some species are simply inferior. The humans asked for mercy 3,000 years ago. They groveled at our feet. They accepted terms that made them the of the galaxy. Such a species does not suddenly become dangerous." He turned back to the viewport, finalized the attack formations. "We move on human space within the day cycle." Far across the galaxy, on a small blue world called Earth, preparations of a very different kind were. Admiral Grace Murphy stood in the heart of Olympus Command, the most secure military installation ever constructed by human hands. It was buried 3 miles beneath the Rocky Mountains, protected by layer after layer of armored plating, energy shields, and automated systems. The facility stretched for miles in every direction, a vast underground complex that housed the nerve center of humanity's true military power. The main command chamber was circular, with walls lined by massive display screens showing real-time data from across human space. Thousands of technicians and officers worked at their stations, their movements calm and efficient. There was no panic here, no fear. These were men and women who had trained their entire lives for this moment, as had their parents before them and their grandparents before that. Colonel Daniel Price approached the Admiral with a tablet in hand. He was in his late 40s, with a strong jaw and steady eyes that had seen combat in border skirmishes most of the galaxy did not know had occurred. "Admiral, status report as requested." "Go ahead, Colonel." "All 37 hidden shipyards have been activated and are operating at full capacity. The reserve fleet is mobilizing from concealed positions across 47 star systems. Current estimated deployment time for full combat readiness is 46 hours. Admiral Murphy slowly, "And the special projects?" Colonel Price's expression shifted slightly, a hint of something that might have been pride creeping into his professional demeanor. "Project Prometheus is fully online. All Prometheus-class vessels have been brought to combat status and are awaiting deployment orders. Project Athene is standing by, with all planetary grids charged and ready. Our analysts estimate that Athene alone could defend Earth against a fleet 10 times the size of what they are bringing." "And Project Ares?" At this, Colonel Price actually smiled. "Project Ares has been waiting 3,000 years for this moment, Admiral. The first deployment units are already in position at the expected invasion routes. They are very eager to begin." Admiral Murphy allowed herself a small smile in return. Project Ares was perhaps humanity's greatest achievement, the culmination of 3 millennia of research into human enhancement, combat training, and tactical development. The Ares soldiers were not quite human anymore, not in the traditional sense. They were stronger, smarter, and more resilient than any baseline human had ever been. Each one was worth 100 ordinary soldiers, and there were millions of them. "Send the diplomatic response," Admiral Murphy ordered. "Keep it short, 4 words." "Already transmitted, Admiral. They have received our acceptance of their declaration." "Good." Admiral Murphy clasped her hands behind her back and studied the strategic display. "Now we wait for them to come to us. Let them think they are the hunters. Let them believe they are walking into an easy victory." Across the galaxy, other species watched the developing situation with emotions ranging from pity to morbid fascination. The Federation, a peaceful collective of herbivorous species, sent a message of sympathy to Earth, expressing hope that humanity would find peace in whatever afterlife they believed in. The syndicate of merchants began taking bets on how long humanity would last, with the most optimistic wagers giving them 3 weeks. The collective of minds, a species of networked intelligences, simply observed in silence, their countless processors analyzing the situation and reaching the same conclusion as everyone else. Humanity was doomed. They had never lost a war. They had never failed to conquer a targeted species. Their military might was legendary, their cruelty infamous. Against such a force, what could a species that had spent 3,000 years in isolation possibly hope to achieve? In a small human outpost on the edge of colonized space, a young officer named Bates sat in her quarters and wrote a letter to her mother. She told her not to worry. She told her that everything would be all right. She told her that humanity had been waiting for this moment for longer than anyone in the galaxy could imagine. And she told her that when the history books were written, they would remember this war as the moment humanity stopped hiding. Bates sealed the letter and sent it through the secure communication network. Then she put on her uniform, checked her sidearm, and reported to her station. The storm was coming, and humanity was ready. The forward assault fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of angry wasps bursting from a disturbed nest. 2,000 warships materialized in the darkness at the edge of the New Providence system, their hulls still crackling with the residual energy of the light travel. Each vessel was a masterwork of engineering, covered in overlapping armor plates that resembled the carapace of their creators, bristling with weapons designed to break worlds. Admiral stood on the command bridge of the Righteous Fury, watching as his fleet assembled into attack formation. He was older than most commanders, his carapace scarred and darkened by decades of warfare, and his compound eyes held the cold patience of a predator who had never known defeat. New Providence was to be a demonstration, nothing more. A small human colony of 3 million inhabitants, far from there with minimal. Its destruction would show humanity the futility of resistance. All vessels report combat readiness, his tactical officer announced. Planetary scans indicate no significant military presence. The colony has only basic orbital and a small garrison. As expected, replied, begin approach formation. We will reduce their orbital platforms first, then commence planetary bombardment. I want this colony erased within the hour. The fleet began to move, 2,000 engines burning in unison as the armada advanced toward the small blue and green world that hung against the star-filled backdrop. Felt a familiar sense of satisfaction settling over him. This was what they were born for. This was their purpose, to conquer, to dominate, to remind the galaxy that some species were meant to rule and others were meant to serve or die. Then the sensor officer spoke, and there was something strange in his voice. Admiral, we are detecting a single vessel rising from the planetary surface. Turned his head slightly, a single vessel. Confirmed, Admiral, one ship. It appears to be approaching our position on an intercept course. Display it. The tactical hologram shimmered and zoomed in on the approaching vessel. It was small by standards, perhaps the size of a heavy cruiser, with a sleek silver hull that seemed to flow like liquid metal. Strange geometric patterns covered its surface, lines and angles that shifted and changed even as watched them. The ship moved with a grace that seemed almost organic, cutting through space with no visible engine signature. What are those markings? Demanded. Why is the hull moving? Unknown, Admiral. Our sensors are having difficulty analyzing the vessel. Its power readings are inconsistent with known human technology. One ship, said slowly, his mandibles clicking together. They send one ship against 2,000. Open a communication channel. I want to hear what these humans have to say before we destroy them. The channel opened with a soft chime, and suddenly the main display showed a human male. He appeared young by human standards, perhaps in his third decade, with short brown hair and an easy smile that seemed entirely inappropriate for someone facing 2,000 warships. He wore a crisp uniform with silver trim, and behind him could see what appeared to be a command bridge, though it looked nothing like any warship interior he had ever seen. The surfaces were smooth and white, with holographic displays floating in midair, and the human sat in a chair that seemed to have grown directly from the floor. Fleet, the human said pleasantly, as if greeting old friends, you have entered human sovereign space. Under the terms of galactic law, I am required to offer you one chance to withdraw peacefully. This is that chance. My name is Captain Samuel Hart of the Constellation, and I am authorized to accept your surrender if you choose to offer it. Stared at the screen in complete silence for several seconds. Around him, his bridge crew had gone equally still, none of them quite able to process what they were hearing. You finally managed, his voice thick with disbelief, are offering us a chance to withdraw, one ship against 2,000. One ship should be plenty, Captain Hart replied, his smile never wavering, but I appreciate you confirming your numbers, it helps with the targeting calculations. This is madness, snarled. You humans have lost your minds during your isolation. Perhaps being alone for 3,000 years drove you insane. We were never alone, Admiral. We had each other, and we had time. Captain Hart leaned forward slightly in his chair. Time to prepare, time to build, time to become something new. The species you conquered 3,000 years ago no longer exists. What stands before you now is something very different. Patience finally snapped. Enough of this. All vessels destroy that ship, leave nothing but atoms. Every weapon in the fleet opened fire at once. Thousands of plasma beams converged on the constellation. Antimatter torpedoes screamed across the void. Kinetic rounds traveling at significant fractions of light speed tore toward the small silver vessel. The combined firepower was enough to crack a planet in half. The constellation vanished. No, that was not quite right. It did not vanish. It moved, except moved was not the right word either. One moment the ship was directly in the path of the devastating barrage. The next moment it was somewhere else entirely, appearing instantaneously to starboard, completely untouched. The weapon's fire continued on its original trajectory, several unfortunate warships in the line of fire taking hits from their own allies. What? Whispered. The constellation moved again, and again, and again. It flickered through space like a ghost, appearing and disappearing without any apparent transition, defying every known law of physics, and wherever it appeared, ships died. The weapons the constellation carried did not fire beams of plasma or missiles of antimatter. They fired something else entirely, pulses of focused gravity that crushed warships into compressed spheres of metal no larger than a human fist, exotic particles that caused reactor cores to implode, collapsing in on themselves and taking entire ships with them, electromagnetic bursts that scrambled every computer system they touched, leaving vessels drifting and helpless. Captain Hart's voice came over the communication channel again, calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather. I should mention that the Constellation is actually one of our older vessels. We keep it around mostly for sentimental reasons. The newer ships are considerably more effective. On the bridge of the Righteous Fury, watched in frozen horror as his fleet was systematically dismantled. Ships that had taken years to build were destroyed in seconds. Crews that numbered in the thousands were erased from existence between one heartbeat and the next. The Constellation danced through his formation like a blade through water, untouchable and unstoppable. 4 minutes passed, then 37 seconds more. When the Constellation finally came to rest, floating motionlessly directly in front of the Righteous Fury, there were no other ships remaining. 2,000 warships, the pride of the Dominion, had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris and cooling metal. Only its flagship remained, deliberately spared, its engines dead and its weapons offline. Captain Hart appeared on the screen once more. He was still smiling. "That was your one chance, Admiral. I am afraid it has now expired." He tilted his head slightly, an oddly human gesture of curiosity. "I would suggest you contact High Commander and inform him of what happened here. He will want to know." His mandibles opened and closed, but no words emerged. His mind could not process what he had just witnessed. 2,000 ships, 4 minutes, one enemy vessel. "I will also give you some advice," Captain Hart continued, his tone almost gentle now. "When you make your report, do not exaggerate, do not add details to make yourself look better. Tell the High Commander exactly what happened, exactly how it happened, and exactly how long it took. He needs to understand what his Dominion is now facing." The communication channel closed. In the silence of his ruined bridge, surrounded by officers who had forgotten how to speak, Admiral began composing the most important message of his life. And on the surface of New Providence, 3 million humans looked up at the sky and watched as the debris of the fleet burned like shooting stars in their atmosphere. They did not cheer, they did not celebrate. They simply smiled, just as humanity had smiled when the declaration of war arrived. Just as humanity would continue to smile as the rest of the galaxy learned what 3,000 years of preparation truly meant. High Commander received the transmission from Admiral in the private chambers of his flagship. He stood alone before the holographic display, his compound eyes fixed on the face of his most experienced fleet commander, and for the first time in his long life, he felt something he did not recognize. It took him several moments to identify the sensation. It was fear. 2,000 ships, was saying, his voice hollow and distant, destroyed in 4 minutes and 37 seconds. A single human vessel, it moved in ways that should not be possible. Its weapons operated on principles our scientists cannot explain. We could not track it, we could not hit it, we could not stop it. Said nothing, his mandibles had locked together, frozen in place by the weight of what he was hearing. "I have sent the sensor recordings," continued. "Watch them yourself, High Commander, watch them and understand. Whatever the humans were 3,000 years ago, they are not that anymore. They are something else now, something we have never encountered." The transmission ended and immediately called up the sensor data. He watched the recording once, then twice, then a third time. Each viewing left him more disturbed than the last. The way the human ship moved, every principle of physics he understood. The weapons it deployed were beyond anything in the Dominion's arsenal. The precision of its attacks, the casual efficiency of its destruction, spoke to a level of technological advancement that seemed impossible. But it was not impossible. It had happened. 2,000 of his ships were now debris scattered across a human star system. Over the following days, more reports arrived. Each one was worse than the last. A battle group of 500 ships sent to secure a strategic hyperspace junction, destroyed in 7 minutes by 3 human vessels. A planetary invasion force of 2 million soldiers, wiped out by orbital bombardment before a single boot touched the ground. A supply convoy of 800 transport ships, captured intact by boarding parties who moved through the vessels like ghosts, killing with weapons that made no sound and left no trace. Every attack the Dominion launched was answered with devastating force. Every fleet sent into human space simply vanished, replaced by transmissions from surviving officers describing horrors they could barely comprehend. The humans were not just winning, they were winning easily. They were winning while making it look effortless. Summoned his intelligence commanders to his private war room and demanded answers. How had this happened? How had a primitive species that had spent 3,000 years in isolation become capable of this? The answers, when they finally came, were almost too terrible to believe. Intelligence operatives had managed to infiltrate human information networks, accessing databases that the humans had apparently made no effort to protect. At first, the operatives believed this was a trap, that the information was false and designed to mislead. But as more data was gathered from more sources, a terrible picture began to emerge. Humanity had not spent 3,000 years in isolation. They had spent 3,000 years. Senior intelligence officer stood before the High Commander and his council, presenting the findings with a voice that trembled despite his efforts to control it. The humans anticipated our return from the very beginning, he explained. They knew the truce was temporary. They knew we would come back to finish what we started, so they made a decision. The holographic display showed a map of human space, but not the small territory the Dominion believed they occupied. This map revealed the truth. Hundreds of star systems, all of them developed in absolute secrecy. Shipyards the size of moons, hidden in asteroid belts where casual observation would never find them. Research stations concealed within nebulae where the electromagnetic interference masked their presence from sensors. Fleet bases buried beneath the surfaces of dead moons, completely invisible from space. They built all of this without anyone knowing, continued. Their official territory, the small region we monitored, was a facade, a show put on for the rest of the galaxy. Behind that facade, they constructed a civilization that rivals anything in known space. His voice emerged as barely a whisper. How many ships do they have? Hesitated before. Our estimates suggest their total fleet numbers somewhere between 15 and 20,000 vessels, High Commander, each one equipped with technology at least a century ahead of our own, possibly more. The silence in the war room was absolute. 20,000 ships. The Dominion had brought 12,000 to this war, and they had believed that to be overwhelming force. The humans had nearly twice that number, and every single one of their vessels was apparently capable of destroying dozens of warships without sustaining damage. But the revelations were not finished. At that same moment across the galaxy, humanity was broadcasting its own message. Not a threat, not a warning, an explanation. Lieutenant Commander Bate, the same young officer who had written a letter to her mother just days before, sat in a comfortable chair in a well-lit room and spoke directly to the surveillance systems that they had believed were secret. Humanity had known about those systems for decades. They had allowed them to continue operating. And now they were using them to deliver a message. You are probably confused right now, Bate said, her voice calm and friendly. Let me help with some answers because I know you are watching this. You have been watching us for a long time. We have been watching you watch us. She smiled slightly, the expression somehow managing to be both warm and unsettling. 3,000 years ago, our ancestors were weak. They knew it, you knew it, everyone knew it. When your fleet arrived and started burning our colonies, we had no choice but to surrender. We for mercy. We accepted humiliation. We took the truce that you offered and retreated to our little corner of space. Bate leaned forward slightly. But here is the thing about humans that you never understood. We learn, we adapt, we improve. And when someone hurts us, when someone threatens our children and our future, we do not forget, we do not forgive, we prepare. The display behind her shifted to show images of human achievements over the past 3 millennia. Children being educated in sciences that they had not yet discovered. Factories producing weapons that operated on principles the Dominion could not comprehend. Soldiers training in combat techniques that treated physics as a suggestion rather than a law. Every generation since the first truce has grown up with one purpose, Bate continued. Every child learned that they would return. Every scientist worked to ensure we would be ready. Every soldier trained for the war that was coming. Your truce gave us 3,000 years. Do you know what we can do with 3,000 years? She gestured at the images behind her. We can become gods. The broadcast continued, showing more and more of what humanity had built. Ships that moved without engines. Weapons that bent space itself. Soldiers who had been enhanced beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Medical technology that could repair almost any wound. Communication systems that operated instantaneously across light years. You should have come back sooner, Bate said, her voice dropping to something almost like sympathy. You gave us too much time, you let us become too strong. And now, well, now you are going to learn what happens when you threaten a species that has spent 3,000 years waiting for revenge. In the war room of the Eternal Conquest, High Commander watched the broadcast in silence. His officers stood around him, all of them frozen, all of them understanding that everything they believed about this war had been wrong. They were not the hunters in this conflict. They were the prey. And they had just walked directly into a trap that had been 30 centuries in the making. High Commander made his last stand at Prime, the ancient of his species. It was a world of dark oceans and towering mountains, where they had first evolved from simple predators into the galaxy's most feared conquerors. For 20,000 years, no enemy had ever reached this place. No hostile force had ever threatened the heart of the Dominion. Until now, had gathered everything his people possessed, every surviving warship from the failed invasion, every reserve vessel pulled from distant outposts, every fighter, every bomber, every armed transport that could carry a weapon. 3,000 ships hung in defensive formation around the planet, their crews knowing that this was their final chance. Behind them waited orbital platforms, ground-based artillery installations, and billions of civilians who had never imagined their world could be threatened. On the bridge of the Eternal Conquest, stood before the viewport and watched the stars. He had not slept in days. His carapace had begun to show the discoloration that came with extreme stress, dark patches spreading across his normally uniform black surface. Around him, his officers worked in grim silence, all of them understanding that their species faced extinction. "High Commander," Sub-Commander said quietly, "the human fleet has arrived." Turned to the tactical display. The human vessels appeared at the edge of the system, emerging from hyperspace with the same impossible grace that had characterized all their movements. He counted them, fewer than 1,000 ships, against his 3,000. For one brief moment, hope flickered in his chest. Then the sensor data began updating, showing the true capabilities of those vessels, and the hope died. "Open a channel," he ordered. "I will speak to their commander." The holographic display shimmered, and suddenly was face to face with Admiral Grace Murphy. She looked exactly as she had during the first transmission, silver hair and storm-gray eyes and an expression of calm patience. She sat on the bridge of a ship that made the Eternal Conquest look like a primitive sailing vessel, surrounded by officers who showed no sign of tension or concern. "High Commander," Admiral Murphy said, "I am Admiral Grace Murphy, Supreme Commander of the United Earth Force. I have come to end this war." "If you have come to accept our surrender," replied, his voice steady despite everything, "know that we will fight to the last. Do not yield. We would rather die than accept the humiliation you would impose upon us." Admiral Murphy was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than had expected. "I have not come to accept your surrender, High Commander." His mandibles clicked in confusion. "Then why are you here, to gloat, to mock us before you destroy us?" "No," Admiral Murphy shook her head slowly. "I have come to offer you a choice, the same choice your ancestors offered mine 3,000 years ago." The words took several seconds to penetrate understanding. When they finally did, he could only stare at the human woman in complete disbelief. "You would spare us," he whispered, "after what we intended to do to your people, after what we did to your people 3,000 years ago, you would offer us mercy." "We are not like you," Admiral Murphy said quietly. "We never wanted this war, High Commander. We prepared for it because we had no choice. Your ancestors made it clear that you intended to return and finish what you started. We could not ignore that threat. We could not pretend it did not exist. So we built, we trained, we waited. But we never wanted to use what we created. We hoped that somehow, somewhere along the way, your people might change, that the war might never come." She paused, and something that might have been sadness crossed her features. "It came anyway. You chose to attack us. You chose to threaten our children and our worlds. And now you have seen what we are capable of. You understand that if we wanted to, we could erase your species from existence. We have the power to do it. We have the technology. We have the will." "But you will not," said slowly, finally beginning to understand. "No, we will not." Admiral Murphy leaned forward slightly in her chair. "Here is what I offer, a truce, a permanent peace between our peoples. You will withdraw all military forces from any territory that is not historically. You will dismantle your offensive fleet and maintain only defensive capabilities. You will cease all aggressive expansion and conquest. In return, humanity will leave you in peace. We will not occupy your worlds. We will not demand tribute. We will not humiliate you the way you humiliated us." Was silent for a long time. Behind him, his officers listened in stunned silence. Through the viewport, the human fleet waited, patient and terrifying. "Why?" finally asked. "Why show us mercy? You have every reason to destroy us. You have spent 3,000 years for exactly this moment. Why would you stop now?" Admiral Murphy smiled slightly. "Because that is not who we are, High Commander. We prepared for war because we had to, but being capable of destruction does not mean we desire it. Humanity did not spend 3,000 years building weapons. We spent 3,000 years building a better version of ourselves. And the people we became do not believe in genocide. We do not believe in conquest. We do not believe in ruling through fear." She spread her hands slightly. "You gave us 3,000 years to prepare for war. What you did not understand is that we also used those 3,000 years to think about what we would do when we won. And we decided that we would not become what you are. We would not answer atrocity with atrocity. We would not repay cruelty with cruelty. You would show mercy to those who showed you none." Yes, Admiral Murphy, but I want you to understand something very clearly, High Commander. This mercy is not weakness, this peace is not permanent tolerance. I am offering you one chance, one opportunity to change. If your people ever threaten another species again, not just humanity, any species, we will return, and next time we will not offer choices. The weight of those words hung in the space between them. We are watching now, Admiral Murphy continued. We will always be watching. Humanity has taken responsibility for this corner of the galaxy. We will protect the weak. We will stand against aggression. We will ensure that no species faces what we faced 3,000 years ago. And if anyone or otherwise tries to conquer and destroy as you once did, they will answer to us. Looked at the human admiral for a long moment. He thought about his people, the billions of on the planet below who were waiting to learn their fate. He thought about the centuries of conquest, the species they had destroyed, the civilizations they had ended. He thought about what it meant to face a power that could have erased his kind from existence and chose not to. Slowly, carefully, the High Commander of the Dominion bowed his head. "We accept your terms," he said, "and I give you my word, Admiral, for whatever that is worth. They will remember this day. We will remember what you chose to do when you had the power to do anything. Perhaps in time we will learn from it." Admiral Murphy, that is all I can ask. The communication channel closed, and the human fleet began to withdraw. They left Prime intact. They left the people to rebuild and reconsider and perhaps eventually to change. On the bridge of the USS, Captain Samuel Hart's voice came over the command channel. "Admiral, do you really think they will keep the peace, after everything they have done?" Admiral Murphy watched the stars streak past as her flagship entered hyperspace. She thought about 3,000 years of preparation. She thought about all the generations who had lived and died never seeing this moment, contributing their lives to a future they could only imagine. "I think they will remember what happens when they do not," she said finally. "I think they will remember that somewhere out there humanity is watching, and I think that will be enough." She smiled, the same calm and confident smile she had worn when the declaration of war first arrived. "Besides," she added, "if they do forget, we will be ready. We have always been ready. That is who we are now." In the years that followed, the galaxy changed. Other aggressive species looked at what had happened to the Dominion and reconsidered their own plans for conquest. Weaker civilizations found themselves protected by the simple fact that humanity existed and would not tolerate their destruction. Peace spread not through force, but through the knowledge that force was available if needed. And humanity continued to grow, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as guardians, as protectors, as the species that had spent 3,000 years learning how to fight and then chose to use that knowledge to ensure that others would not have to. The galaxy had expected the 3,000-year truce to end in humanity's destruction. Instead, it ended with humanity's smile. And that smile changed everything.